Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study call. We've been doing our study in Your Invisible Power by Genevieve Behrend, and we'll be continuing on with that study today. We are in chapter 8, and the title of this chapter is Why I Took Up the Study of Mental Science. So this chapter, she's going to kind of go over her own backstory, some of the things that she did that got her into studying these principles that she's sharing with us in this book. So, all right, let's jump right in. I have frequently been questioned about my reasons for taking up the study of mental science, and as to the results of my search, not only in knowledge of principles, but also in the application of that knowledge to the development of my own life and experience. Such inquiries are justifiable, because one who essays the role of a messenger and a teacher of psychological truths can only be effective and convincing as he or she has tested them in the laboratory of mental experience. This is particularly true in my case, as the only personal pupil of Thomas Troward, the great master of mental science of the present day, whose teaching is based upon the relation borne by the individual mind toward the universal creative mind, which is the giver of life, and the manner in which that relation may be invoked to a secure expansion and fuller expression in the individual life. Now, I've had a few different mentors along my way in journey in studying these principles, and there's been people on kind of both sides of the fence when it comes to these principles and ideas. Some say that you should wait until you've actually proved that these things work for you before you try to teach them to others, and then others that say teach whatever you know. And I I think that there's some truth on both sides. I know for me, from my personal experience, I've proved these things true, and I'm continuing to work on proving them true in greater and greater ways. Um, if you've watched any of my other videos and some of my trainings, you might have come across me talking about how I went from being in a job to creating my own business, and basically quadrupled, almost went 5 times, quintupled my income in a very short amount of time. It was about 6 months amount of time. And then I've been working on making that even greater, going beyond that. Now, in these principles, and we've talked about this before, it's not really about the money. The money is just a tool that can help you to purchase the things, the tools, to be able to go on the vacations, to be able to have the experience, to be able to meet with certain people, so that you can advance your own life and progress towards the things that you're trying to create. And so there's no magic in actually having the money. The money is just a tool. And I was just using that for me personally as an example, because I think a lot of people, when they come to these types of ideas, one of the main things that people are interested in is having more money, especially because if you've never had a whole lot of money and life's been a struggle, it can appear sometimes that money will solve all those problems. Now, money does solve some problems. That's true, but money doesn't solve every problem. And so when you gain more money, when you have more money, it will solve those problems that money does solve. But the other problems that money doesn't solve, it won't solve those. And in some ways, having a lot of money can make those other problems more difficult. Um, Now, I'm not saying that to discourage anyone from going after money, but just to be aware of the things that are going to happen when you become wealthy. If that's something that you're seeking after, is that there are going to be money brings its own tests and trials from having it. So I agree to some extent that before sharing and going out and teaching this, you have to prove it for yourself. But in as far as you have learned some of these principles, I think that you can share them with other people. Share the good that you know, and try to bless other people's lives with it. The initial impulse toward the study of mental science was an overwhelming sense of loneliness. In every life, there must come some such experiences of spiritual isolation as that period pervaded my life. Notwithstanding the fact that each day found me in the midst of friends, surrounded by mirth and gaiety, there was a persistent feeling that I was alone in the world. I had been a widow for about 3 years, wandering from country to country, seeking for peace of mind. Now, what she's talking about there is actually pretty true. I've had my own experience of feeling like being in isolation and then coming out the other side of that and feeling immensely connected, not necessarily with everybody around me, but with God, with this spirit, with this power that is behind everything, where I didn't feel it necessary to have those other connections. I wanted them, but they weren't a need anymore. That I didn't feel like I was being pulled to engage in those things. Now I have a lot of good relations. I have some good friends. I have good family, and I have a good wife, and I have children that I love and adore. And I enjoy spending time with all of those. And so it's not about whether you're going to spend time with them or that you're going to go off like this monk into the mountains, but you don't feel the need. You do feel the want. I do want to spend time with my family, my friends, my children, my wife, but I don't feel compelled to. And if I don't, and if things of life, things get busy or whatever, and I'm not able to spend time, as much time as I would like with some of those people, it's I don't feel like a letdown. I don't feel like my life is missing anything. It's just part of the times and seasons of what I'm going through. And then there are times and seasons in my life where it seems like, I'm getting to spend lots of time with these people. And so it just really depends on the time and season of where you're at in your life and what's going on, but really feeling connected to this spirit, to this um, intelligence that is behind it all is such a calming and such a faith building uh, sense of relief that you often get, but it oftentimes doesn't come until after this sense of isolation that happens. It seems like we often get put into difficult situations to see how we do before we are then pulled out and then we come into the sunshine, so to speak. The circumstances and surroundings of my life were such that my friends looked upon me as an unusually fortunate young woman. Although they recognized that I had sustained a great loss when my husband died, they knew that he had left me well provided for, free to go anywhere at pleasure, and having many friends. Yet if my friends could have penetrated my innermost emotions, they would have found a deep sense of emptiness and isolation. This feeling inspired a spirit of unrest that drove me on and on in fruitless search upon the outside for that which I later learned could only be obtained from within. Now, I think this goes back to the idea that I was expressing before. I don't know how wealthy Genevieve Behrend's husband was and how much wealth he left her with when he passed away. But it sounds like it was not insignificant, that there was plenty of money for her to kind of live through life how she sees fit and not feel in a state of penury where she felt like she had to scrimp and save. And and so even in that state of having plenty of money, she felt these feelings of loneliness. She's felt this isolation, this emptiness, as she says. And that goes back to the idea of what I was talking about, that money doesn't solve every problem. It does solve problems, and it does solve some problems, but it doesn't solve every problem. And I think that she has been feeling this, and so she's searching for something more. And she says that she learned that she couldn't find it outside of herself, but she had to find it and obtain it from within. I studied Christian Science, but it gave me no solace. Though fully realizing the great work the scientists were doing and even having the pleasure and privilege of meeting Mrs. Eddy personally, but it was impossible for me to accept the fundamental teachings of Christian Science and make practical application of it. When about to abandon the search for contentment and resign myself to resume a life of apparent amusement, a friend invited me to visit the great seer and teacher Abdul Baha. After my interview with this most wonderful of men, my search for contentment began to take a change. He had told me that I would travel the world over seeking the truth, and when I had found it, would speak it out. The fulfillment of the statement of this great seer then seemed to be impossible, but it carried a measure of encouragement and at least indicated that my former seeking had been in the wrong direction. I began in a feeble and groping way to find contentment within myself, for had he not intimated that I should find the truth, that was the big thing, and about the only thing I remember of our interview. Now, if you read and study the lives of people that did great things, that accomplished things, you'll often find that there was some kind of guide. There was somebody that kind of pointed the way initially for those people. Now, it's not always. Sometimes the person pointing the way for them to go was in the form of a negative. Sometimes you have people that, maybe they had a very poor upbringing and they had a poor example of what it is to be a good parent. And so they then took that example and they improved upon it, and they kind of went to the opposite side because they didn't want to emulate the things that their parents were doing. And so sometimes it's not always, some guru that's saying, here, go climb this mountain. Sometimes it comes in the form of just adversity through different avenues of life. And we all have adversity in one form or another. And sometimes it's overcoming that adversity that then inspires us to, help others to overcome their adversities. I know for me personally, that was, my journey, that overcoming my own adversities, overcoming some of my own faults and weaknesses led me to want to help others to overcome those same things. And, if any of you are aware, I teach a program where I help people with addictions, specifically pornography addictions, but the same structures and wiring that goes on in the brain for one addiction is the same for another addiction. So the principles that I teach helping people overcome their pornography addictions will work for any addiction. And so me overcoming my own addiction, then it made me want to reach out and to help others overcome their addictions. And I've built this this program that helps people. And if any of you are interested in it, it's something that I offer free of charge. I don't charge anything for it, but I do it just because I want people to have these principles of freedom that they can go out and obtain without there needing to be this high bar of obtaining it. Now, whether or not they apply those teachings is another story, but at least the knowledge is there for them. Because I know that there are people that talk about the idea that if there's not an exchange, there's not something charged for something, people don't value it, and there is some truth into that. But I would rather give the knowledge and the understanding to people and let them figure it out themselves than deprive anyone of something that could change their life. All right. A few days later, upon visiting the office of a New Thought practitioner, my attention was attracted to a book on his table entitled The Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science by Thomas Troward. It interested me to see that Troward was a retired divisional judge from the Punjab, India. I purchased the book thinking I would read it through that evening. Many have endeavored to do the same thing only to find, as I did, that the book must be studied in order to be understood, and hundreds have decided, just as I did, to give it their undivided attention. Now, I have this book of his Edinburgh lectures. There's also some lectures that he did in Dory, and these things are heavy. Like she was saying, they're not something you can just sit down in the afternoon and read. They're something that you have to go over to truly try to understand what he is saying. And these lectures are filled with all kinds of good information. And if any of you are interested, I would highly recommend going in and picking those up. And maybe at some point in the future, we might go over some of the lectures here in this study. But let's go on with her story. After finding this treasure book, I went to the country for a few days, and while there studied the volume as thoroughly as I could. It seemed extremely difficult, and I decided to purchase another book of Trowards in the hope that its study might not require so much of an effort. Upon inquiry, I was told that a subsequent volume, the Dory Lectures, was much the simpler and better of the two books. When I procured it, I found that it must also be studied. It took me weeks and months to get even a vague conception of the meaning of the first chapter of Dory, which is entitled Entering into the Spirit of It. I mean by this that it took me months to enter into the spirit of what it was that I was reading. Now, she's hitting on a point that is so important, that whenever you study something, and I use the word study specifically because you can go and you can read things, and many people read things and they take nothing from it, or they do nothing with it. So when I use the word study, what I mean by it is that you're actually taking the time to try to understand what it is that the author is trying to say, and then how to implement that in your own life. And then once you figure out how to implement, actually implementing it. Because most people, the pitfall that most people make when they enter into this world of self-improvement and trying to make their lives better, and they study some of these mental sciences, is they read all the theory and they get all excited and they think that this is cool information, and it's somewhat magical and it's going to change their life, but then they never apply it. Or if they do apply it, it's for only a couple of days and then they give up. This is because there's a couple of reasons. I don't want to go into it here, but I'll make mention of the terror barrier. And if you've heard me talk about the terror barrier before, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's this barrier that when we come upon, that our mind and our body kind of rebel against going forward, and that will actually create circumstances and skew our reality to try to get us to come back to safety. And so it can be difficult in applying these new things and making these changes, but you want to study so that you can actually make the changes you want in your life, because if you don't make the changes, then you won't see the results. And a lot of people cry that these things don't work because they read a book and they thought that, it was going to change them. They went to some seminar, they listened to some teacher. Well, none of those things are going to make the change. You have to make the change yourself. But in the meantime, a paragraph from page 26 arrested my attention as seeming the greatest thing I had ever read. I memorized it and endeavored with all my soul to enter into the spirit of Troward's words. When she's talking about enter into the spirit, what she's talking about is that idea that I was just expressing of taking upon yourself that principle and embodying it, living it. That's entering into the spirit of something. The paragraph reads, "My mind is a center of divine operation. The divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression, and this means the production of something beyond what has gone before, something entirely new, not included in the past experience, though proceeding out of it by an orderly sequence of growth. Therefore, since the divine cannot change its inherent nature, it must operate in the same manner with me. Consequently, in my own special world, of which I am the center, it will move forward to produce new conditions, always in advance of any that have gone before." Now, I'm not going to go into all this there because there's a lot there, but just wanted to touch on maybe two of these ideas here that she's expressing. So one is that you are a divine center of operation, and in studying this book, we've learned about that you are a center of creation, and how you are a part of this bigger whole that is a creative power itself, but that you are an individualized offshoot, so to speak, of this creative power. And that because this creative power is trying to work through you, and that it wants to create more, it's always for expansion, then you can know that it's trying to work through you for expansion. Now, the rub of it here is are you going to work with it to create that expansion, or are you going to use the laws to work against it and to create less, to where it will go on to others to create this thing? And the last point I wanted to touch on here is this idea of that it comes out of what's already there to create new growth. If you look at technology, I think technology is a good example of this, that we didn't go straight from the horse and buggy to the airplane and the cell phone. There were steps along the way. There were things that needed to be created in order for all of these things to come about. And without those preceding steps, the following wouldn't have been able to be created, regardless of whether anybody would have had the idea to be able to do it or not. Now, for somebody to create a light bulb like Edison did, it needed electricity and the understanding of electricity to, and then even the lines to have been ran so that then electricity could come and, and light up the light bulb. So there's a progression of things. And if you can find that line of where the progression is, and if you want to enter in to adding to it, if you feel a call to, there's a lot that can be done there, and a lot that can benefit and bless a person's life, financially and in many other ways. All right, so let's continue on with her story. We're just about to the end of it. It took an effort on my part to memorize this paragraph, but in the endeavor toward this end, the words seemed to carry with them a certain stimulus. Each repetition of the paragraph made it easier for me to enter into the spirit of it. Now, I'm not much for memorization. I'm not very good at just sitting down and memorizing something, but I am very good at exposing myself to things over and over again, to where it's there in kind of that storehouse of memory, to where I can bring it out if I'm inspired to, or if it's just flowing, these words can just come out of me. And the reason is that, and what she's talking about here is, it's not just simple memorization that she did, but she memorized it upon her very being. And I do the same thing, because I memorize these principles, I memorize these ideas in my very being, meaning that I act these things out in the world. And because I'm acting these things out in the world, then I can speak from them. I can talk about them. I can quote things that I have read once before, because these principles are a part of me. They're not just something that I intellectually memorized. And so, if you're not very good at memorizing something, which I'm not that great, you don't need to worry about whether you actually memorize things word for word, but it's about embodying them, taking those principles on and incorporating them into what you do. And in that way, you memorize those things, so to speak, to where they become second nature almost. They become the attitude and the principles from which you live your life. The words expressed exactly what I had been seeking for, my one desire for the peace of mind. I found it comforting to believe that the divine operation in me could expand to fuller expression and produce more and more contentment. In fact, a peace of mind and a degree of contentment greater than I had ever known. Now, what you'll find that if you incorporate these principles into your life and you actually live them, and you start to see the results of them, and you build faith that these principles work, you'll feel this same feeling that she's feeling. I felt it for myself. That's how I know that these things work, is that when you have the peace of mind that you can create whatever it is that you want, forgetting about whatever situation that you're in, then you don't have any doubt. You don't have any fear, because you know that you can change the circumstances of your life in whatever way that you want, whenever it is that you want. The paragraph further inspired me with deep interest to feel that the life spark in me could bring into my life something entirely new. Excuse me. I did not wish to obliterate my past experience, but that was exactly what Troward said it would not do. The divine operation would not exclude my past experience, but proceeding out of them would bring some new thing that would transcend anything that I'd ever experienced before. And so this kind of hits on the idea that I think some of us from time to time, especially if we've had significant mistakes in our past or we've had trauma, that we wish that we could go back and change those circumstances. But if we were to go back and change those circumstances, who knows where you would be now? And if you've started to incorporate these ideas into your mind and into your body, and you're starting to learn about them, how are you first exposed to them? If you were to go back into the past and change those things so that they didn't happen to you, maybe you wouldn't be listening to this call now. You wouldn't be studying the things that you're studying. And so there wouldn't be any benefit to you. And so we don't really want to go back and change the past, but we want to leverage the experiences that we've gained from it. Because if you've made a mistake in the past, if you made some great error, there was probably a lot of lessons that you learned from that. And you can leverage those lessons to not make them in the future, but also sometimes to bless and help other people. Like I mentioned earlier on the call, that's something that I've experienced and that I'm doing, that I'm leveraging my mistakes to help other people not fall into the same pitfalls that I fell into. Meditation on these statements brought with it a certain joyous feeling. What a wonderful thing it would be if I could accept and sincerely believe beyond all doubt that this one statement of Troward's was true. Surely the divine could not change its inherent nature. And since divine life is operating in me, I must be divinely inhabited, and the divine in me must operate just as it operates upon the universal plane. And these are the principles that we've been talking about, prior to this, that if there is this divine spirit and you are a part of it, that means it flows in and through you, and that this divine spirit can operate through you to create whatever it is that you're looking at doing. And if you can become cognizant of that idea, if you can build faith in that idea, there's nothing that you can't accomplish. This meant that my whole world of circumstances, friends, and conditions would ultimately become a world of contentment and enjoyment, of which I am the center. This would all happen just as soon as I was able to control my mind and thereby provide concrete center around which the divine energies could play. Surely it was worth trying for. If Troward had found this truth, why not I? And I would say, why not you? I have found this truth, and you can as well. The idea held me to my task. Later I determined to study with the man who had realized and given to the world so great a statement. It had lifted me from my state of despondency. The immediate difficulty was the need for increased finances. All right, that's the end of chapter 8. She's going to continue on with her story of how she became a student of Troward in chapter 9. So we'll end it there for now, and we'll pick up tomorrow. Let's see, not tomorrow. We'll pick up on Monday with our further study of this, and we'll go more into the story of how she became a student of Troward. And so with that, we'll end this call, and hope that you have a wonderful weekend and go out and make yourself a wonderful day. Bye for now.